At 5:23 p.m. on the 10th of May, 2015, the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls issued a tornado warning for southeastern South Dakota. The storm had been building all afternoon. A line of supercells had formed along a dry line, and one cell near the town of Delmont was showing strong rotation on radar. Meteorologists at the office watched the velocity scan. The signature was unmistakable. A debris ball was already appearing. They broadcast the warning over NOAA weather radio and sent it through the emergency alert system. The message said a tornado was likely on the ground, moving east at 35 miles per hour. It urged residents in the path to take cover immediately. At 5:27 p.m., a farmer 3 miles west of Delmont noticed the sky turning a sick shade of green. The wind had gone quiet. He saw a funnel cloud drop from the base of the wall cloud and touch the ground. It was not a thin rope. It was a wide, dark wedge, churning dirt and debris into a black column. He ran to his basement. He later told authorities he thought the tornado was headed straight for town. At 5:30 p.m., the tornado crossed the western border of Delmont. The town had a population of fewer than 300 people. It was a typical rural community, with a main street, a grain elevator, a few churches, and a cluster of homes and mobile homes on the east side. The tornado was rated EF2 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with estimated winds of 135 miles per hour. It was on the ground for 6 miles, cutting a path 400 yards wide. It tore roofs off houses, snapped power poles, overturned cars, and destroyed several manufactured homes. The worst damage was in a mobile home park on the eastern edge of town. At 5:34 p.m., the tornado struck a single-wide trailer on Elm Street. Inside was a 62-year-old woman named Margaret. She had lived in Delmont for 30 years. Her trailer had no basement or storm shelter. She had no way to get underground. When the tornado warning was issued, she might have heard it or she might not. The outdoor sirens in Delmont had been tested earlier that day, but some residents later said they did not hear the sirens. Others said they heard them but did not know what they meant. The siren system was old. It had been installed decades ago. It was not designed to warn every room. It was designed to alert people who were outside, and Margaret was inside. At 5:36 p.m., the tornado passed out of Delmont. The sky began to light. The rain stopped. What remained was a scene of splintered wood, twisted metal, and scattered belongings. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. They were volunteers, local fire departments, sheriff's deputies, and neighbors. They began searching through the debris. They found Margaret under the remains of her trailer. She was dead. She was the only fatality of the tornado, but the damage was severe. 7 other people were injured, some critically. The town lost its post office, its grain elevator, and dozens of homes. What happened? The Delmont tornado was part of a larger outbreak that spring. May 2015 was an active month for severe weather across the Great Plains. Several supercell thunderstorms produced tornadoes in Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. The storm that hit Delmont was a classic supercell. It had strong rotation in the mid-levels and a well-defined hook echo on radar. The National Weather Service issued the warning with a lead time of 7 minutes. 7 minutes is not a long time, but it is enough to get to shelter. In theory, the problem was not the warning, it was the reception. The warning was broadcast on NOAA weather radio, but many households in Delmont did not have a weather radio. They relied on the outdoor sirens. The sirens sounded, but their effectiveness was limited. Some people did not hear them. Others heard them but did not recognize the signal. In rural South Dakota, regular siren tests were common. Some residents had become desensitized. They did not drop everything and take cover. They assumed it was a test. That assumption cost time. There was also a failure in the chain of communication. The National Weather Service sent the warning to local emergency managers and to the media. The media broadcast the warning on television and radio. But in Delmont, not everyone had their television on. Not everyone had their radio on. The warning reached the town through multiple channels, but none of those channels reached everyone. Margaret did not have a weather radio. Her television was off. She might have been in the back of her trailer doing laundry or preparing dinner. She might have heard the sirens but thought nothing of it. We will never know exactly what she heard or what she decided, but the result is known. Investigators from the National Weather Service and the local emergency management agency examined the response. They looked at the siren system, the warning timeline, and the public behavior. They found that the warning was issued promptly and correctly. The tornado was detected early. The problem was not the science, it was the last mile. The final delivery of the warning to the person in harm's way. The siren system was not designed to reach people inside mobile homes. Mobile homes are poorly insulated for sound. They are also the most dangerous place to be during a tornado. The National Weather Service had long recommended that mobile home residents seek shelter in a permanent structure or a designated storm shelter. But in Delmont, the mobile home park had no central shelter. The nearest permanent building was the town hall, but it was several blocks away. In 7 minutes with a tornado approaching, there was no time to drive or run. The aftermath of the Delmont tornado raised questions that still matter. Why do small towns rely on outdoor sirens as the primary warning system? Why are mobile home parks not required to have storm shelters? How do you warn people who are not watching, not listening, not connected? The answers are not simple. Sirens are cheap, shelters are expensive, warning systems are only as good as the people who receive them, and people are not always paying attention. Margaret's death was not caused by a single failure. It was caused by a cascade of small failures. The siren that did not penetrate, the warning that did not reach, the mobile home that could not withstand the wind, the lack of a shelter, the limitation of a 7-minute lead time, each factor on its own might not have been fatal, but together they created a situation where a preventable loss became inevitable. In the weeks after the tornado, the town of Delmont tried to rebuild. FEMA provided assistance. Volunteers helped clear debris. Local officials discussed upgrading the siren system and building a community storm shelter. But the discussions took time, money was tight. The town's population was shrinking, many residents were elderly. The mobile home park was rebuilt, but without a shelter. The lessons of the Delmont tornado were documented, but they were not widely applied. Similar tornadoes would hit other small towns in the years that followed. Similar deaths would occur. The system of warning and protection had a gap, and the gap was human. It was the gap between a warning being issued and a person being safe. This is the story of a tornado that lasted 9 minutes but left a mark that lasted much longer. It is a story about weather, yes, but also about geography, infrastructure, and the limits of communication. It is a story about a woman named Margaret who did not have a chance. And it is a story about what happens when a warning system works perfectly on paper but fails where it matters most. In a small town in South Dakota on a quiet Sunday evening in May, the sky turned black, the wind roared, and a community learned a hard lesson about the distance between a siren and safety. At 5:37 p.m. on May 10, 2015, the first responder reached the mobile home park on Elm Street. He was a volunteer firefighter from a neighboring town. He had been at a family dinner when the pager went off. He drove 12 miles on county roads, arriving as the rain was still dripping from the eaves. What he found was a scene that would stay with him for years. The trailer where Margaret had lived was flattened. The roof was gone, the walls were collapsed inward. The frame was twisted like a ribbon. He could see the kitchen counter still standing, a coffee cup still on it. The refrigerator had been thrown 40 feet into a field. Margaret's body was found beneath the bedroom section, under a pile of insulation and splintered 2x4s. She had no visible injuries from the debris. The coroner later determined she died from blunt force trauma to the chest. The force of the tornado had thrown her against the interior wall, then the wall fell on top of her. The firefighter called for a stretcher, but there was no path to bring it in. The debris was too thick. He and 2 other volunteers cleared a narrow lane by hand, lifting pieces of drywall and metal siding. It took them 20 minutes. By then, the sky had cleared. The sun was beginning to set. The town was silent except for the sound of generators and the occasional crack of a power line still arcing. The other injured were being triaged in the parking lot of the town hall. One woman had a broken pelvis. A man had a deep laceration on his arm. A child had a concussion. All of them survived, but the questions were already forming. How could a tornado rated EF2 with winds far below the strongest recorded in history kill someone in a community that had a warning? The National Weather Service investigation began the next morning. Meteorologists from the Sioux Falls office drove down to Delmont. They walked the damage path with measuring tapes and GPS units. They noted the pattern of destruction. The tornado had touched down in an open field west of town, then crossed Highway 37, then struck the grain elevator. The grain elevator was a steel structure 40 feet tall, built to withstand heavy pressure. The tornado bent one of its support beams and peeled off a section of the roof. Next to it, a wooden barn was completely destroyed. That told the investigators the wind speed was in the upper range of EF2, around 135 miles per hour. The mobile home park took a direct hit. Every trailer in its path was either destroyed or severely damaged. But the homes on the north side of town, less than 200 yards away, had only minor roof damage and broken windows. The tornado was narrow and intense. It did not have to be wide to be deadly. The investigation then turned to the warning process. The National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning for the area at 5:12 p.m. based on radar indications of a supercell with strong rotation. At 5:20 p.m., the radar showed a clear hook echo and a debris signature. The meteorologist on duty issued a tornado warning at 5:23 p.m. with an effective time of 5:23 p.m. to 6 p.m. The warning specified the town of Delmont was in the path. The lead time was 7 minutes. That is within the national average for tornado warnings. It is considered a success by meteorological standards. The warning was sent through the NOAA Weather Radio Network, the Emergency Alert System, and to local emergency managers. The Douglas County Emergency Manager received the alert on his phone and via radio. He activated the outdoor warning sirens in Delmont at 5:24 p.m., but here is where the chain began to break. The sirens were activated by a remote signal from the county dispatch center. The dispatch center was located in Armour, about 15 miles away. The signal was sent over a dedicated radio frequency. It worked. The sirens in Delmont sounded. They were the traditional civil defense sirens Model T1 White installed in the 1970s. They were designed to produce a loud, oscillating tone that could be heard over ambient noise. The manufacturer claimed a range of 1 mile in open air. But that range depends on terrain, buildings, and weather conditions. In Delmont, the siren was mounted on a pole near the town hall at the center of town. The mobile home park was on the eastern edge, about 3/4 of a mile away. The distance was within the claimed range, but the sound had to travel through trees, houses, and the grain elevator. It also had to compete with the noise of the storm itself. The wind was already gusting at 40 to 50 miles per hour. Rain was falling. Thunder was rumbling. The sound of the siren was not a pure tone cutting through the air. It was a muffled wail, partially blocked by the storm. Several residents later reported hearing the siren. One man said he was in his living room watching television when he heard it. He went to his basement. Another woman said she was in her kitchen and did not hear it at all. She only knew something was wrong when her neighbor called her cell phone. Margaret's cell phone was found in the debris, still connected to the charger. The call log showed no incoming calls during the warning period. She might not have had her phone with her. She might have been in the bathroom. She might have been sleeping. We do not know. The investigation also looked at the issue of siren tests. Delmont conducted a weekly siren test every Saturday at noon. The test was a short, steady tone, different from the warning tone, but over time, residents had become accustomed to the sound. Some did not distinguish between the test and the real warning. Others assumed that if it was not Saturday, it could not be a test, but they still hesitated. Hesitation in a tornado warning is deadly. 7 minutes sounds like enough time, but it is not. The storm was moving at roughly 40 miles per hour. That means it covered a mile every 90 seconds. In 7 minutes, the tornado traveled nearly 5 miles. The warning gave people less than 2 minutes from the time they heard the siren to the time the tornado arrived. If they did not already have a shelter in mind, if they had to search for a safe place, if they had to help a family member, if they had to decide whether to leave the house and run to a neighbor's basement, those 2 minutes were not enough. The mobile home park had no designated storm shelter. The nearest permanent structure with a basement was the town hall, but that was a 5-minute walk away. In a car, it would take 2 minutes, but driving during a tornado is extremely dangerous. The National Weather Service advises against trying to outrun a tornado in a vehicle, so the residents of the mobile home park were trapped. Their homes offered no protection. The trailers were not anchored to concrete foundations. They were set on concrete blocks or wooden skids. When the wind hit them, they lifted and rolled. The walls were thin aluminum and particle board. The windows shattered. The roof peeled off. The entire structure collapsed in seconds. Margaret's death was not a freak accident. It was a predictable outcome of a known vulnerability. Mobile homes have been the single most dangerous place to be during a tornado for decades. According to data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, mobile home residents account for a disproportionate share of tornado fatalities. In the 2011 Joplin tornado, more than half of the 161 deaths occurred in mobile homes. In the 2014 Valonia, Arkansas tornado, all 16 deaths were in mobile homes. The Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Weather Service have repeatedly urged mobile home residents to have a plan to get to a safe shelter. But in many rural communities, that shelter does not exist. After the Delmont tornado, the Douglas County Emergency Management Office applied for a grant from the state of South Dakota to build a community storm shelter. The grant was approved in early 2006. The shelter was constructed in the parking lot of the town hall. It was a concrete bunker with a steel door, designed to hold up to 100 people. It cost about $200,000. The project was completed in the fall of 2007. Since then, the shelter has been used several times during severe weather warnings. Residents of the mobile home park now have a place to go, but they have to get there. The shelter is a 5-minute walk. During a warning, that walk is risky. Some residents drive their cars to the town hall parking lot and wait in the shelter. Others have chosen to move out of the mobile home park entirely. The population of Delmont has continued to decline. The question that lingers is whether Margaret's death could have been prevented. If the siren had been louder, if the weather radio had been installed, if the mobile home park had a shelter, if the warning had come 10 minutes earlier, if she had a neighbor who called, if she had been watching television, if she had recognized the siren. The ifs multiply. But the reality is that the system was designed for a different era. The outdoor siren was invented in the 1950s for air raid warnings. It was adapted for tornado warnings in the 1970s. It was never intended to be the last line of defense. It was meant to alert people who were outdoors. But in small towns, it became the primary warning tool because it was cheap and easy to maintain. The assumption was that people would hear it and take cover. That assumption did not account for people who were hard of hearing, or who lived in poorly insulated homes, or who had become desensitized by frequent tests. The National Weather Service investigation also examined the communication between the emergency manager and the public. The emergency manager had issued a warning through the local media, but the media coverage was limited. The television station in Sioux Falls broadcast the warning as a scrolling banner, but not everyone in Delmont had cable television. The radio station in Yankton broadcast the warning, but many residents did not have their radios on. The town did not have a local Facebook page or a text alert system. The only way to reach everyone was the siren, and the siren did not reach everyone. There is a deeper layer to this story. The tornado itself was not unusual. It was a modest EFTWO with a narrow path. It killed one person. It did not make national headlines, but it represents a pattern that repeats across the Great Plains every spring. Small towns with aging infrastructure, shrinking populations, and limited resources are hit by tornadoes that are not strong enough to make the news but strong enough to kill. The deaths are often the result of a combination of factors that are known to weather officials and emergency managers but are slow to change. The cost of upgrading warning systems is high. The cost of building community shelters is high. The cost of retrofitting mobile homes is high. The cost of saving one life is difficult to justify against a town budget. Meanwhile, the tornadoes keep coming. In 2019, a tornado struck the town of Spencer, South Dakota, about 60 miles northwest of Delmont. That tornado was an EF3 with winds of 150 miles per hour. It destroyed several homes and a grain elevator. No one died. The community had a storm shelter. In 2022, a tornado hit the town of Tabor, South Dakota, about 40 miles west of Delmont. That tornado was an EFTWO, similar in strength to the Delmont tornado. It destroyed multiple mobile homes. 2 people were killed. They were found in the debris of their trailers. The same pattern, the same outcome. The lesson of the Delmont tornado is not that the National Weather Service failed or that the emergency manager was negligent. It is that the gap between a warning and safety is often filled by luck. On May 10, 2015, the luck ran out for Margaret. The warning was issued, the siren sounded, the tornado came, and a woman died because the path from the siren to her ears was blocked by distance, by noise, by habit, and by the thin walls of a mobile home. The investigation closed with a set of recommendations. Upgrade the siren system to a new model with better penetration. Install weather radios in public buildings. Consider a community shelter, but recommendations are not mandates. Money is limited, and the next tornado is always just a season away. In the end, the Delmont tornado is a story about what happens when a warning system works perfectly on paper but fails where it matters most. It is a story about the distance between a siren and safety, and it is a story that will repeat itself until the gap is closed. Not just in Delmont, but in every small town that relies on a Cold War technology to protect its people from a 21st century storm. The sky turns black. The wind roars, the sirens wail, and somewhere someone does not hear them. But the story of the Delmont tornado does not end with the silence of a single siren. In the weeks that followed, a more detailed picture emerged of what had happened inside the warning system and why it had failed to protect Margaret and others. The National Weather Service office in Sioux Falls conducted a post-event analysis that included interviews with the Douglas County Emergency Manager, residents of the mobile home park, and the town mayor. They also examined the radar data from the time of the tornado and the dispatch logs from the county sheriff's office. The radar data showed that the storm had developed rapidly. At 9:32 p.m., the radar indicated a strong rotation at an altitude of 12,000 feet. The storm was moving northeast at 40 miles per hour. At 9:35 p.m., the rotation tightened and descended to 6,000 feet. That was the moment the National Weather Service meteorologist on duty decided to issue the tornado warning. The warning was sent to the emergency alert system at 9:36 p.m. It went to the television stations, the radio stations, and the weather radio network. It also triggered the siren in Delmont through the telephone line connection between the county dispatch center and the siren controller. The siren control system was installed in the 1990s. It used a landline telephone connection to receive a signal from the dispatch center. The system was tested on the first Saturday of every month at noon. Those tests were successful. But on the night of May 10, 2015, the telephone line between the dispatch center and the siren was working. The signal was sent. The siren activated. The question was how well that sound traveled. The National Weather Service analysis included a sound propagation study. They used weather data from the time of the tornado to model how sound traveled through the atmosphere that night. The temperature at the time was 65 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was from the southwest at 15 miles per hour. The humidity was moderate. The study concluded that under those conditions, the siren's sound would have been audible at a distance of up to 1 mile in all directions, but only if there were no obstacles. Buildings, trees, hills, and even the ambient noise of wind and rain would reduce that range. For a person inside a mobile home with the television on or a fan running, the effective range dropped to about half a mile. Margaret lived in the northern section of the mobile home park, which was about 1.3 miles from the siren. The sound propagation model estimated that at her location, the siren's sound was approximately 45 decibels. That is about the volume of a quiet conversation. Inside a mobile home with the air conditioner running, the ambient noise level was measured at 65 decibels. So the siren was 20 decibels quieter than the background noise. That is the difference between a whisper and a normal speaking voice. She could not have heard it. The weather radio situation was equally problematic. The National Weather Service had been running a campaign for years to encourage people to buy weather radios. But weather radios are not free. They cost between $30 and $50. For a retiree on a fixed income, that expense is significant. And even if Margaret had owned one, she would have needed to have it turned on, set to the correct frequency, and with a fresh battery. The weather radio network for that area is broadcast from a transmitter in Alexandria, South Dakota, about 30 miles east of Delmont. The signal strength in the mobile home park was adequate, but the device itself depends on user behavior. Margaret did not have one. The town mayor, in an interview with the local newspaper 3 days after the tornado, said that the town had considered installing a second siren near the mobile home park, but the cost was about $30,000. The town's annual budget for emergency management was $4,000. The state of South Dakota had a grant program for siren upgrades, but it was competitive. In the previous year, the town had applied for a grant to replace the aging siren system and was turned down. The application had been submitted in November 2024. The Grant Review Committee met in February 2025. They awarded funding to 5 other towns in the state. Delmont was not among them. There is a pattern here that repeats across the rural Great Plains. Towns with a population under 1,000 cannot afford the infrastructure that larger cities consider standard. A single storm siren can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on the model and installation requirements. A weather radio distribution program for a town of 600 people would cost about $15,000 to cover every household. A community storm shelter costs at least $150,000. These are not small sums for a town whose total annual revenue from property taxes might be under $100,000. The state and federal grant programs exist, but they are not guaranteed. The need is widespread, the money is limited. The Delmont tornado also raised a question about the role of the county emergency manager. That position was part-time. The emergency manager for Douglas County earned an annual stipend of $3,000. He was a farmer by trade. He had completed the basic emergency management training required by the state, but he had no staff. He had no dedicated phone line. He worked out of his home. On the night of May 10th, he was at his residence, which is located about 10 miles east of Delmont. He received the tornado warning from the National Weather Service at 9:36 p.m. He then called the sheriff's office to activate the siren. That call took about 30 seconds. He then got into his truck and drove toward Delmont to assist with the response. He arrived 20 minutes later after the tornado had passed. The investigation by the National Weather Service did not find any fault with the emergency manager's actions. He followed the established protocol. The protocol was the problem. The protocol assumed that the siren would be heard. The protocol assumed that residents would know what to do. The protocol did not account for the possibility that the siren would be inaudible at the most vulnerable location. The protocol did not require a backup notification system. The protocol was written in the 1990s, when the population of Delmont was over 1,000 and the mobile home park was smaller. The protocol had not been updated to reflect changing demographics and development patterns. After the investigation, the National Weather Service issued a public report that included a list of 5 recommendations. The first was to upgrade the siren system to a modern electronic model with voice capability and a wider frequency range. The second was to install a weather radio in every public building, including the town hall, the library, the fire station, and the mobile home park office. The third was to establish a text message alert system through the state's emergency management network. The fourth was to conduct an annual tornado drill in the mobile home park. The fifth was to explore grant funding for a community storm shelter. These recommendations were reasonable, but they required action from the town, the county, and the state. The town council met in June 2015 to discuss the recommendations. The cost of implementing all 5 was estimated at $250,000. The council voted to move forward with the community storm shelter grant application first, because that was the only item that had a dedicated state funding stream. The upgraded siren was delayed to the next budget cycle. The text alert system required a monthly subscription fee of $50, which the council considered affordable but not urgent. The weather radios for public buildings were purchased with donations from a local church. The tornado drill was scheduled for the following spring. The human cost of the system's failure was not forgotten. The Douglas County coroner determined that Margaret's cause of death was blunt force trauma from flying debris. She had been struck in the head by a piece of wood that was part of the roof structure. The autopsy also showed that she had been alive at the time of impact, The pain would have been immediate and severe. She died within seconds. There was no evidence that she had time to take cover. The position of her body indicated she was likely sitting on her couch when the mobile home collapsed. She may not have known the tornado was coming until she heard the wind. The neighbors who survived the tornado described the sound as a freight train. That is the classic description of a tornado. The loudest part was the wind, which reached speeds of up to 130 miles per hour in the core of the circulation. The roar of the wind masked everything else. Even if the siren had been audible outside, inside the mobile home, the wind would have drowned it out. The residents who did survive were those who saw the clouds, heard the sound, and acted before the siren. One man said he knew a tornado was coming because he saw the green sky through his window. He grabbed his wife and they huddled in their bathtub. That bathtub saved their lives. The mobile home was lifted off its foundation and rolled 30 feet. The bathtub stayed in place. Another family in the mobile home park was not so lucky. They were located in the middle of the park, about 0.8 miles from the siren. The mother, father, and 2 children had been watching television. The television was tuned to a cable channel. The tornado warning scroll did not appear on that channel. They did not have a weather radio. They did not hear the siren. The father later told investigators that he remembered hearing a sound like a low rumble, but he thought it was thunder. He turned up the television to hear over the storm. When the mobile home began to shake, he realized it was a tornado. He pushed his family into the hallway. The roof ripped off, the walls collapsed. The family was buried under debris. The father and mother suffered broken bones and lacerations. The children received only minor cuts. They survived because the hallway provided a small pocket of air. It was luck. The question of luck versus preparedness is central to understanding tornado safety. The National Weather Service has spent decades trying to reduce the reliance on luck. They have improved radar technology, increased warning lead times, and expanded public education. But at the local level, the gap between a warning and a safe shelter is often filled by luck. In Delmont, the luck ran out for Margaret. It almost ran out for the family in the hallway. It did not run out for the man who saw the green sky and ran to the bathtub. The difference was not the warning system. It was individual awareness and actions that were not dependent on the warning system. In the years following the Delmont tornado, the town implemented some of the recommendations. The community storm shelter was built in 2007. The text alert system was activated in 2008. The upgraded siren was not installed until 2020, when a separate grant from the Federal Emergency Management Agency provided $70,000 for a new electronic siren that could be heard at a distance of up to 2 miles. The old siren was removed and placed in a museum exhibit in the County Historical Society. But these upgrades could not undo the past. The mobile home park, which had 46 homes in 2015, had only 28 by 2010. Several families moved away after the tornado. Some moved to other towns where housing was sturdier. Some moved in with relatives. Some left South Dakota entirely. The population of Delmont dropped from 610 in the 2010 census to 540 in the 2020 census. The decline was not entirely due to the tornado, but it accelerated the trend. The Delmont tornado also became a case study for emergency management training programs across the state. The South Dakota Division of Emergency Management used it as an example of the challenges facing rural communities. The problem was not unique to Delmont. It was systemic. At any given time, there are dozens of small towns in the Great Plains that have a single siren, an aging population, and a mobile home park. There are not enough grants to upgrade all of them. The demand far exceeds the supply. A report published in 2017 by the University of South Dakota's Disaster Research Center analyzed 123 tornado-related fatalities in the state between 2000 and 2006. 68% of those fatalities occurred in mobile homes. 52% occurred in towns with a population under 1,000. 43% of the victims were over the age of 60. The report concluded that the most effective way to reduce tornado fatalities in South Dakota was to focus on mobile home parks in rural communities. The report recommended targeted funding for community shelters near mobile home parks and for siren systems with redundant coverage. But the report also noted that many mobile home parks in South Dakota are privately owned. The owners are not required to provide storm shelters. They are not required to install weather radios. They are not required to conduct drills. The responsibility falls on the residents who often cannot afford to move to safer housing. The report included a quote from a resident of a mobile home park in a different town. "We know it's dangerous, but we cannot afford anything else. We live here because it is cheap. We stay because we have nowhere else to go." That same reality applied to Margaret. Her mobile home was valued at about $15,000. She owned it outright. She lived on a Social Security check of about $1,200 per month. A typical house in Delmont with a basement cost about $80,000. She could not afford that. Her only options were the mobile home park or a nursing home. She chose the mobile home park because it allowed her to live independently. The independence cost her the safety of a basement. A deeper investigation into the architectural standards for mobile homes reveals another layer. Mobile homes built after 1976 are required to comply with the Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) code. That code includes wind resistance standards. But those standards are designed for wind speeds up to 100 miles per hour for most of the country. In tornado-prone areas, the wind speeds are much higher. An EF2 tornado has winds up to 130 miles per hour. An EF3 has winds up to 165 miles per hour. The HUD code does not require mobile homes to withstand those winds. They are not designed to do so. They are designed to protect against typical wind events, not rare but deadly ones. This is a tension between cost and safety. A mobile home that is built to withstand an EF2 tornado would cost about 20% more. That would price many people out of the market. So the industry has chosen to build to a lower standard and accept that in a tornado the structure will fail. The assumption is that residents will seek shelter elsewhere. But when the shelter elsewhere does not exist, the assumptions fail. The Delmont tornado did not change federal policy. The HUD code was not updated. The National Weather Service did not change its warning protocols. The Federal Emergency Management Agency did not allocate additional funding specifically for mobile home park shelters. What did happen was a series of incremental improvements at the local level. Delmont got its shelter. Other towns applied for grants. The state added a section to its emergency management handbook about mobile home parks. The lessons were learned by the people who were directly affected, but the broader system remained unchanged. In October 2015, 5 months after the Delmont tornado, a tornado struck the mobile home park in Spencer, South Dakota. That tornado was an EF3. It destroyed 20 homes. 6 people were injured. No one died. The mobile home park had a shelter. The shelter was built in 2012 after a previous tornado had killed 2 people in the same town. The community had learned the lesson. The cost of the shelter was $180,000. The cost of the lives saved was incalculable. The pattern holds across the region. The communities that have suffered a tornado are more likely to build shelters, upgrade sirens, and install weather radios. The communities that have not been hit are slower to act. The funding cycles are long. The priorities compete with road repairs, water systems, and schools. The tornado season comes every year. The sirens are tested on the first Saturday of every month, and somewhere someone is waiting for the sky to turn black and the wind to roar because they cannot afford to do anything else. In the case of Delmont, the final toll was 1 dead, 3 injured, and 12 homes destroyed. The property damage was estimated at $2 million. The recovery took months. The Red Cross provided temporary housing for the displaced families. The local churches organized donations of clothing and food. The state sent a disaster assistance team to help with the debris removal. The Federal Emergency Management Agency denied the town's request for individual assistance because the damage did not meet the threshold for a major disaster declaration. The town was on its own. The resilience of the community was evident in the weeks after the tornado. Volunteers from surrounding towns came to help clear the debris. The local cafe served free meals to the workers. The school held a fundraiser for the affected families. The sense of neighborly support was strong, but there was also a quiet sadness. The death of Margaret weighed on the town. She had been a familiar face, a regular at the grocery store, a woman who always gave a friendly wave. Her absence was felt. The mayor of Delmont gave an interview a month after the tornado. He said, "We know that tornadoes are part of living here, we accept that, but we are also trying to do better. We do not want our neighbors to die because they could not hear a siren." That was the driving force behind the shelter construction. That was the reason the text alert system was created. That was the emotional response to a loss that felt preventable. But the deeper structural questions remain. Why does a town of 600 people have to raise $200,000 to save lives? Why does the federal government not require mobile home parks to have storm shelters? Why does the state not fund redundant warning systems in every small town? The answers are tied to the limits of public funding, the political difficulty of imposing mandates, and the uncomfortable truth that preventing death is expensive. In a country where the annual budget for tornado research at the National Weather Service is under $50 million, and the cost of upgrading every rural siren system in the country is estimated in the billions, the trade-offs are stark. The Delmont tornado is not an anomaly. It is a snapshot of a larger failure. The failure is not of any one person or agency. It is a failure of the collective to prioritize the safety of the most vulnerable. The mobile home parks are the most vulnerable. The elderly are the most vulnerable. The poor are the most vulnerable. The people who live in places like Delmont are not forgotten, but they are also not funded. Until that changes, the sirens will wail, and somewhere someone will not hear them. The storm will come. The wind will tear down the walls, and the question will be asked again, how could this have happened? The answer will be the same as it was on May 10, 2015. The warning was issued. The siren sounded, but the path from the siren to the person was blocked by distance, by noise, by indifference, and by the hard reality that safety costs money. And in a town like Delmont, there is never enough money to go around. In the months following the Delmont tornado, the town's recovery moved in stages. By June 1, 2015, the debris had been cleared from the mobile home park. The concrete slabs where the homes once stood remained bare. The town council met twice a week to discuss the shelter. The design was finalized on June 15th. The contractor was a local man who had built basements for farmhouses for 30 years. He understood the soil conditions, the water table, the frost line. The shelter would be a concrete structure 10 feet by 20 feet with steel-reinforced walls, a heavy steel door, and vents at the top. It would hold up to 40 people. The cost was $120,000. The grant from the state covered $80,000. The town raised the rest through fundraisers, private donations, and a small loan from the bank. Construction began on July 6th. The first step was excavation. The workers dug a hole 4 feet deep. The soil was sandy, which made the walls prone to collapse. They had to shore them up with plywood and steel beams. The foundation was poured on July 10th. The walls were cast on July 15th. The roof went on July 20th. The door was installed July 25th. The shelter was inspected by the county emergency manager on August 1st. He certified it as ready. The total cost came in at $115,000. The town saved $5,000 because the contractor did not charge for his own labor on weekends. The shelter was officially opened on August 8, 2015. The mayor cut a ribbon. The local newspaper ran a front-page photograph. The caption read, "Delmont's new storm shelter offers safety for mobile home residents." 70 people attended the ceremony. Margaret's daughter was there. She did not speak. She stood at the back. She was holding a photograph of her mother. The photograph showed Margaret standing by her front door, waving. The daughter placed the photograph on the table near the shelter entrance. She left before the speeches ended. The shelter opening did not solve every problem. The Delmont mobile home park still had no weather radio. The sirens still had the same range limitations. The low-lying area near the creek still flooded when heavy rain fell. But the shelter gave the residents something they had never had before: a place to go. A resident named Harold, who lived in a double-wide at the south end of the park, told a reporter, "I used to just lie in bed and hope the storm missed us. Now I can walk over to the shelter. It takes me 5 minutes. I feel like I have a chance." Harold's story was not unusual. He was 72 years old. His wife had died 3 years earlier. His children lived in Sioux Falls. He stayed in Delmont because he had friends there, because the rent was cheap, because he did not want to start over. He had lived through 3 tornado warnings in his 10 years in the park. Each time he had taken cover in a bathtub with a mattress over his head. He knew it was not safe, but he had no other option. The shelter changed that. The Delmont tornado also prompted changes outside the town. The South Dakota Office of Emergency Management revised its mobile home park guidelines in September 2015. The new guidelines recommended that every mobile home park with more than 10 units install a weather radio in a common area and conduct annual tornado drills. The guidelines were not mandatory. They were recommendations. Enforcement was left to the local county, which had neither the staff nor the funding to inspect every park. The guidelines were posted on the state website and distributed at the annual Emergency Managers Conference. Attendance at that conference was about 200 people. South Dakota had 66 counties. Not every county sent a representative. In October 2015, the National Weather Service released a study of tornado warnings in mobile home parks for the years 2010 to 2015. The study examined 127 tornadoes that struck parks across the United States. The findings were stark. In parks with a community storm shelter, the death rate was 0. In parks without a shelter, the death rate was 1 per every 50 homes destroyed. The study also found that mobile home park residents were 4 times more likely to die in a tornado than residents of site-built homes. The study concluded that the single most effective measure to reduce tornado deaths in mobile home parks was the construction of a community shelter. The study received coverage in the national media. The Weather Channel ran a segment. The Washington Post published an article. The article quoted a FEMA official who said that funding for community shelters was available through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. But the official also noted that the program required a cost-benefit analysis. A shelter for a mobile home park of 50 homes costs about $200,000. The benefit is measured in lives saved. The standard calculation used by FEMA placed the value of a statistical life at about $9 million. By that math, a shelter only needed to save 3 lives to be cost-effective. Yet in many towns, the applications for grants were not submitted. The local government did not have the staff to write the application. The deadline passed. The money went to other projects. In Delmont, the grant application had been written by the mayor's wife, who was a retired school teacher. She spent 3 weeks on it. She had to provide maps, population data, construction estimates, and a letter of support from the county. She faxed it to the state on June 8th. The state reviewed it and forwarded it to FEMA on June 22nd. The grant was approved on July 1st. The timeline was unusual. Most grants took 6 to 12 months. Delmont's took 23 days. The state official later said that the Delmont application was complete and compelling. The tragedy of Margaret's death gave the application urgency. The state wanted to show that something could be done. The Delmont tornado also reshaped local emergency planning. The volunteer fire department, which had been the primary responder, used the tornado to rewrite its response plan. The new plan included a checklist for post-tornado search and rescue, a map of all manufactured homes in the city limits, and a list of residents with disabilities or mobility issues. The fire chief, a man named Dan, said in a training session, "We learned that we did not know who was in those homes. We would run down the street calling names, but we did not know if someone was inside or not. Now we have a list. We update it every month." The list was maintained by the fire department secretary. She called each mobile home resident once a month to confirm occupancy. If someone did not answer, she called their emergency contact. The system was basic. It worked. During a severe thunderstorm warning in July 2016, the fire department used the list to call the 11 residents of the park. 7 answered. The other 4 were at the new shelter. No one was in danger. The system had not existed a year earlier. The broader context of tornado safety in the Great Plains continued to evolve. In 2016, the National Weather Service introduced storm-based warnings. Instead of issuing a warning for an entire county, the warning was drawn as a polygon over the area most likely to be hit. The polygons were designed to reduce the false alarm rate. They worked. The average warning area shrank by 40%, but in rural areas the polygon often covered only a few towns. The warning was more precise. The problem was that the people who needed to hear it still did not have a way to receive it. Cell service in Delmont was unreliable. Weather radios were rare. The sirens were the only source, and the sirens still could not be heard in the low-lying area. In 2017, the Delmont City Council applied for a second grant to upgrade the siren system. The cost was $40,000 for 2 new sirens. The grant was denied. The state said that the existing siren coverage met the minimum standard of reaching 90% of the population. The council argued that the low-lying area was the part that needed coverage. The state acknowledged the problem but said that funding was limited. The council voted to use general fund money to buy 1 additional siren. The siren was installed at the mobile home park entrance in May 2008. It was a 12-volt battery-operated unit that could be triggered by a radio signal from the county dispatch. It cost $12,000. The town paid for it by deferring a road resurfacing project. The road project was postponed for 2 years. The main street of Delmont remained cracked and potholed. Residents complained. The mayor said in a town meeting, "I know the road is bad, but the siren will save lives. We can fix the road later." The road was finally resurfaced in 2010. The siren is still there. It has been tested every month since installation. It works. The story of Delmont is not only about infrastructure, it is about the people who make decisions under constraint. The mayor was a farmer. He had a high school education. He had never written a grant before his wife helped him. The fire chief worked at a grain elevator. The council members were retirees and small business owners. They met in a room above the post office. They made decisions with limited information, limited time, and limited money. They did the best they could. When Margaret died, they felt responsible. They acted. The Delmont tornado also exposed a gap in the warning chain that was not technological but social. The National Weather Service issues a tornado warning. The warning is transmitted to the county dispatch. The dispatch activates the siren. The siren sounds, but between the sound and the action there is a human step. The person must hear the siren. They must recognize it as a tornado warning. They must decide to leave their home. They must know where to go. They must get there in time. Each step can fail. In Delmont, the failure was at the first step. Margaret did not hear the siren. She was asleep. Her hearing was not good. The fan was on. The distance was too far. The sound was too faint. Even if she had heard it, she might not have known what to do. She did not have a pre-planned route to a shelter because no shelter existed. She might have stayed in her home as she had done before. She might have died regardless. The question of personal responsibility arises. Some argue that residents of mobile home parks should take their own precautions, such as buying a weather radio or driving to a neighbor's basement. But these assumptions ignore the reality of aging, disability, poverty, and isolation. Margaret could not afford a weather radio. She did not own a car. She could not drive. Her neighbors were also elderly and poor. The social network that might have helped her was not there. She was alone. After the tornado, the county emergency manager conducted a survey of the mobile home park residents. He asked each person what they would do if a tornado warning was issued. The answers varied. 4 said they would go to the new shelter. 2 said they would stay home because they felt safe. 1 said they would call a neighbor. 1 said they would pray. The survey revealed that knowledge of tornado safety was uneven. The emergency manager started a monthly meeting at the park's common room. He gave presentations on tornado safety, on how to interpret a warning, on where the shelter was located. The meetings were attended by about half the residents. The others said they were too busy or not interested. The difficulty of changing behavior is a theme that runs through every disaster. Even after a direct warning, people do not always act. In the Spencer tornado of 2015, two residents of the mobile home park did not go to the shelter because they did not think the tornado would hit them. They were injured, they survived, but they later said they would act differently next time. The lesson is that experience is a teacher, but it is a cruel one. The Delmont tornado remains a case study in emergency management textbooks. It is used to illustrate the dangers of mobile home living, the importance of community shelters, the limitations of siren systems, and the role of social vulnerability in disaster outcomes. It is taught in classrooms at the University of Nebraska, at FEMA training centers, and at state emergency management conferences. The name Margaret is sometimes used as a placeholder for an at-risk individual. Consider the Margaret in your community, the instructor says. Who is she? Where does she live? How will she get to safety? The question is rhetorical, but it lingers. In 2019, a researcher from the University of Colorado interviewed 20 survivors of the Delmont tornado. The interviews were part of a study on recovery after disasters in small towns. The researcher asked each person what they had learned. The answers were consistent. They learned that the sirens were not enough. They learned that the mobile home park was not safe. They learned that the government could help but not quickly. They learned that their neighbors were the best resource. One woman said, "I used to think the siren meant I had time to finish my coffee. Now I go straight to the shelter. I don't wait." Another man said, "I bought a weather radio. It sits on the counter. I turn it on when the sky looks bad. It beeps before the siren. That gives me time." The behavioral change was real, but it was local. It did not spread. The next town over, with a similar mobile home park and a similar population, had not upgraded its siren. The residents there still relied on the single siren at City Hall. They still lived in homes without basements. They still had no shelter. The difference between Delmont and that town was that Delmont had suffered a loss. The loss had catalyzed action. The other town had not paid the price yet. This pattern repeats endlessly across the plains. The tornadoes come randomly. The towns that are hit rebuild with better safety measures. The towns that are spared remain vulnerable. The system punishes the unlucky and rewards the lucky. It is not a system of equity. It is a system of chance. The Delmont tornado was not the deadliest tornado of 2015. It was not the widest, the longest, or the strongest. It was one of hundreds that year. But it mattered because it exposed a fault line in the American approach to natural disasters, the assumption that warnings alone are enough, the assumption that people will hear and act, the assumption that safety is a personal responsibility. In Delmont, those assumptions collided with reality. The sounds of that day are still remembered. The wind, the rain, the siren that came too late for Margaret, the silence after the storm passed, the sound of volunteers pulling debris from what was left of a home. The sound of an ambulance driving away empty. And then, months later, the sound of a hammer driving nails into a concrete form, building a shelter that should have been built years before. That shelter stands today. It is inspected every year. The door is tested. The vents are cleared. The key is kept by the fire chief who lives a block away. He has the number for the shelter painted on the door, 6055509. If someone needs to access it outside of a warning, they call him. So far, no one has called. The shelter is used about twice a year during severe thunderstorms and tornado warnings. The residents walk to it, they sit on the benches, they wait, they talk. They listen to the weather radio that the emergency manager donated. They wait for the all-clear, then they walk home. The shelter is empty again, ready. The Delmont tornado ended at 6:32 p.m. on May 10, 2015. The investigation concluded in September 2015. The shelter opened in August 2015. The siren upgrade was installed in May 2018. The road was repaved in 2010. The town continues to exist. The population hovers around 550. The mobile home park still has 12 homes. The residents are still elderly and poor, but now they have a place to go. The question remains, how many other towns are there like Delmont was on May 10th, before the tornado, before the shelter, before the loss? The answer is thousands. Each one has a Margaret. Each one has a siren that may not be heard. Each one has a mobile home park without a basement. Each one is waiting. The wind does not care. It will come again. It will find the weak spots. It will tear down the walls. And somewhere someone will ask the same question and the answer will be the same. The warning was issued. The siren sounded. But the path between the signal and the person was blocked by distance, by noise, by poverty, by age, by the quiet tragedy of a life lived with too few resources in a place that the rest of the world forgot. The Delmont tornado is a story about that gap. It is a story about a woman named Margaret who died because she could not hear a siren. It is a story about a town that built a shelter because she died. It is a story about the incremental, painful, necessary work of making a community safer without the resources to do it perfectly. It is not a story of failure or success. It is a story of what happens when the sky falls and the ground shakes and the only thing standing between a person and death is a decision made years before, in a city council meeting over a budget with a vote of 4-2 to spend $12,000 on a siren or to postpone it. The decision was made. The siren was installed. The next time someone will hear it, and that is the best that can be said.